Hi, this is November 3rd, 2013, and there's a couple reasons that we're recording this. First of all, Dee Dee's dad used to tell us the story of his life, and it was from when he was a teenager till he got a store in Norwich, and he repeatedly told his story, and I was the slowest person, so I couldn't run out of the room. We asked him to tape it, and he froze up, so unfortunately we don't have a record of it, so we lost all that information. Secondly, I want to leave something to my descendants, that what my life was like. And I guess another reason is that although I'm 80 years old now, I was young once, and I know I perceived my parents as loving people, and they provided me food and clothing and everything else, but I really didn't know about their personal lives and frankly showed no interest to ask them. That was a mistake. Well, to begin with, my father, Nicholas Stathis, is from Kouni, Greece, in the province of Arcadia, I believe. And to the best of my knowledge, he had one brother and 5 sisters. My mother is Catherine Christou, before she was married, is from Nyata, from the province of Laconia, and again, to the best of my knowledge, and I don't know, is she had one brother and 3 sisters. My mother's father's name was John. I don't know my grandmother's name. My father's name was Anthony, and I don't know my grandmother's name. Their life is far more interesting than mine. I never pretty much suffered through hardship, but when you think that they left Greece to come to a strange land, a different language, starting with nothing and prospering, it was quite a feat. A little about myself, that I was born in Brooklyn, New York in March 8, 1933. So I'll try to reconstruct what little I know about my parents. I don't know the years they came over. I do know my father came over, and I think he met up with his brother, whose name I think was John, but I'm not sure. And he died at an early age, and I don't have any awareness of the circumstances. But somehow he wound up in Rochester, New York. My mother's brother was in this country in Fairport, New York, but she came and first lived with an uncle. His last name was Kominaki, but it was Americanized to Cummins. And eventually she made it to Fairport. I don't think she lived with her brother and his wife, but lived with a couple with the name of Woolsey. And although I didn't know it at the time, I always thought their name was Thea and Baraba, and I didn't realize that was a Grecian version of aunt and uncle, and she corresponded with them for many years. But nevertheless, that my father met my mother, and they did get married in 1925. In fact, the same date that Dee Dee and I got married, ironically. My father was kind of bullheaded, to say the least. They used to call him chondrocephalo, that means hard-headed. And my uncle was equally the same, and perhaps even more so. So I think they were partners at one time, but that broke up. Also, my father was a minor owner in the California Fruit Company, which was a fruit stand in Rochester on Front Street, which that street no longer exists, I think. And that turned out to be the Zoot's Wholesale Company. And I'm sure my father would have prospered financially had he stayed there, but again, I don't know the circumstances of why they left Fairport and why they left the California Fruit Company in Rochester. But nevertheless, they moved to Brooklyn, New York. And I know very little about that. My mother and father got the concessions to the ferries from one of the ferries from Brooklyn to Staten Island. My mother ran the restaurant. My father had the magazines, fruit stand, comic books, many comic books that when I was growing up I read every one of them, and I wish I'd saved some of them, but that's another story. I don't know when they started, and I'm sure there was an interesting story involved with that for to have that lucrative concession. There must have been some politics involved and whatever else, but nevertheless, they were there, and as a youngster, I never gave it a second thought. Sure, my parents had the concessions, and as I grew up, I was able to go down there, and my life was great as a kid. In fact, my life was pretty much great overall. I knew all the captains of the ferry boats, and I was able to ride the ferry boats and even steer them at sometimes to go from Brooklyn to Staten Island. So that was great in itself. Life in Brooklyn was unique, that you lived on your neighborhood, and your neighborhood was pretty much one block. That there were a lot of apartment houses and even single-family houses. You didn't know kids from the next block. There were all kind of unique games that were played in Brooklyn that were a lot of fun. So I really had a great childhood. My first school was public school 82 on 36th Street. We lived on 41st Street. There were no such thing as school buses then, by the way. And I guess the greatest honor I had there, I won the Theodore Roosevelt Medal in 6th grade, which I guess was for the outstanding student. I think that's the last medal I ever won, but I'm still hoping. And from there, I went to Dewey Junior High School. That's the 7th grade. This junior high school was right across the street from where we lived, so it was pretty easy to go back and forth to school. And in that schoolyard was where we played a lot of our games, softball, handball. We climbed on the roofs of things, and we had all these unique games that no longer exist, that were done without any equipment, or at best a stick and a tennis ball. But in 7th grade, for whatever reason, again, I was too stupid to ask. My parents lost the concessions at the 39th Street Ferry, probably in part because the Verrazano Bridge, I believe, was being erected, so there weren't as many ferries, if any, from Brooklyn to Staten Island. Well, somehow we evolved to Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania, where they became partners with my mother's best friend, Fidel Pappas, and her husband George, and her brother, who was a divorcee. To be frank, I was a pretty miserable son to my parents, because I hated to leave Brooklyn really hated to leave Brooklyn, and made it very well known to them, to my sadness. But there's a lesson to be learned on this, that even though I hated leaving Brooklyn, I ultimately got to love Jersey Shore. But unfortunately, tragedy hit there too. The Jersey Shore, Pennsylvania is right on the banks of the Susquehanna River, and where the restaurant was a half a block pretty much downhill from the river. The river flooded, caused a lot of damage to the store. We lived upstairs from the store on the second floor, so there was no damage in the house. So that was a pretty shattering thing. I don't know why, but we lived there 2 years. I was in the, let's see, seventh and eighth grade. And I guess the way that works, since I started school in Brooklyn in the middle of the year, because they had classes A and B, which no longer exist, I was pushed up a half a year when I went to Jersey Shore. But again, for whatever reason, I don't know whether there was a conflict or the store was basically too small for 3 partners, we left. Much to my chagrin, because I really like Jersey Shore now. And we went back to Brooklyn, in fact, on the same street where we lived before, but we didn't have what was a fairly nice apartment before. We were living in probably 2 rooms. And God bless my father, he had to work at a hot dog stand on, help me, the name of the place in Manhattan where the boats go by the Statue of Liberty.
Battery Park?
In Battery Park, thank you. And in the wee hours of the night, and as probably all youngsters, or I don't know if I was a teenager then, I was pretty well self-centered and didn't concern myself about how life was perhaps not so pleasant for my mother and father. But somehow, and I don't know how, my parents became partners again with Theo and George Pappas in a town called Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. And perhaps I got a little smarter, I didn't complain as much this time, because my experience in Jersey Shore, I hated to leave my friends in Brooklyn. I still have very fond memories of that. But then we moved to Wellsboro. Maybe it was my Brooklyn accent. One thing I forgot to mention in Jersey Shore, was in 7th grade then, and immediately got elected president of my class without anybody knowing me. And what happened in Wellsboro, maybe it was my Brooklyn accent, I immediately got elected vice president of my class with no one knowing me. I later blew that pretty much, that when the next year's elections were being held, the president, who ironically was also from Brooklyn, wasn't in town, and I had to conduct the meeting, which was not my forte. And it was a complete disaster, that neither I was nominated nor the boy that was president all these years was nominated. So,
oh my goodness.
excuse me. But nevertheless, another friend of mine was elected president. I graduated from Wellsboro in 1950. Perhaps the biggest highlight of Wellsboro was that because I was from New York City, I was able to convince people, let's go to the World Series. And 2 carloads of people, considering that there was only 84 in my graduating class, drove to New York and stayed there for, well, three days probably, completely disrupting the school system, but we had really a wonderful time and very many fond memories of it. And I had a lot of good friends in Wellsboro and valued their friendship very much. Unfortunately, I gave no thought to my education. My parents knew very little about going to universities or schools or anything like that. So I guess it was decided, well, go to business school, and that was Rochester Business Institute here in Rochester, New York. And probably the most earth-shattering thing that happened that affected my life there was coming to Rochester. I missed the bus, and which is typical of me, I might add. And I figured, what do I do now? And I heard about this thing called hitchhiking. So I stuck my thumb out, and a girl picked me up. And I figured, this is great. This hitchhiking is all right. So I got to Rochester, and now live with my aunt and uncle. My aunt and uncle.
Their names?
Oh, I'm sorry, Nikita and Florence Christou. They were childless, and I'm guessing now, but I think my uncle had aspirations that I would be like a son to him. But unfortunately, I was, and perhaps still am, if my wife and daughter will attest to, kind of bullheaded, and that wasn't my idea. So I used to go half days to Rochester Business Institute studying accounting, which coincidentally that was selected because I took an aptitude test, and the results of the aptitude test was I had no aptitude, so which was fine. But I took accounting, and school was a half a day, and they had a work program. They would get you a job if you wanted it, and I know I did at least a couple things I can remember. I was a typist for a hospital donation program where I would type letters to people to solicit money, and I also worked in a tie factory called Suburban Cravats, packing neckties in boxes. So what it amounted to is I went to school half days, taking the bus, by the way. That's when buses ran more frequently than they do now. Coming back, going to the Fairport Candy Kitchen, that was my uncle's and aunt's place, having a delicious meal, usually a sandwich and a milkshake, and weekends going to see my friends in Wellsboro, again hitchhiking, which did not suit my uncle too well, and understandably so. Youngsters hearing this now probably don't know what hitchhiking is, but now you don't see it as very dangerous, and even then it was somewhat dangerous, and I've had pleasant and unpleasant experiences without going into detail. I've had a gun pulled on me. I was picked up by someone who was fleeing her husband, whose car was right behind us, and trying to outrun him. And various episodes, a lot of them dealing with that it didn't matter the time of day or night that I hitchhiked. Nothing bothered me. It didn't matter what the weather was like, and sometimes I hit some pretty bad conditions. But then, again, I was pretty much of a party animal in Wellsboro. That's why I went back and forth all the time. And one of my friends told me, hey, why don't you come down to Penn State and think of going to a college, and It's a great party place. So again, got my thumb out again, went from Rochester to State College, Pennsylvania, at Pennsylvania State University. And he was right, it was a great party time. I had a great time, and I figured, hey, this is the place for me. Well, it was fortunate for me, but my friend, Jack Lewis, enjoyed parties so much, he flunked out of school, so he wasn't there when I got there. Again, fortunately, he went to law school and became a lawyer and was very prosperous in Wellsboro, Pennsylvania. I was determined that I thought I'd wasted a year being in Rochester, and I wanted to graduate in 3 years from Penn State, so I started in summer school and did very well. In fact, the first course I remember I took was history, and it was so enlightening. It wasn't like history you learned in high school. It was really very, very interesting. So I did fairly well till I got into my normal routines of playing cards and partying, and my grades kind of suffered. So I kind of stumbled along. I never gave a thought to see if I could get credit for the time I spent in Rochester. Never entered my mind, because basically what they taught in Rochester was as good as better than Penn State did for accounting. So life went on pretty much until 1953, and then one of the most significant things that altered my life happened. My mother got into an automobile accident driving with her friend from Wellsboro to Bath, New York, and as a result she became paralyzed from the waist down and suffered through the rest of her life. Although my mother suffered the most, as you can imagine, had a dramatic effect on me and my father. Both my mother and father wanted me to continue school, and obviously this was out of the question. Like most immigrants, although my mother worked side by side with my father in all his businesses, she was not on a payroll and had no Social Security. So she got nothing from that. The only insurance that the lady had was the basic one, and I thought, well, you got to have a lawyer to take care of it. That was stupid too, that he conveniently took a quarter of the $10,000 insurance without doing anything. In fact, later on I heard there was some question about faulty road work that caused the accident, but it was never pursued, so I really don't know anything about that. So what happened was that I quit school and worked with my father in the restaurant, and my mother, after staying in a hospital in Corning, New York, had to go to a rehabilitation center in West Orange, New Jersey. But to give you a flavor of the times, in our hot dog stand, basically, if we took in $100 a day, that was considered a good day. And the bulk of our business came on high school being a couple blocks away, and the kids would come down to eat hot dogs and whatever, and there were two groups, so again, it was my father and me, 100%. Basically, my father stood at the grill and served the hot dogs, and I would wait on, I guess there were 6 tables crammed full of students, shouting the orders, delivering the orders, taking the money, and there was also a counter with probably, a dozen stools that were completely full, and again, doing the same thing in addition to maybe cooking any hamburgers it was. So effectively, I ran from 12 o'clock, served all these people, took all the money. Again, my father doing yeoman's work, having to wash the dishes to get ready for the next batch at 12:30. And now, for someone that moves as slowly as I do, it's just amazing how that was done. But again, to show the reflection of the times that hot dogs were 20 cents. Cigarettes were 17 cents a pack. I guess they're $10 a pack now in New York State. Coffee was a nickel, and you paid for each refill. Now you're paying close to $2 and more in Starbucks. The rehabilitation center, which we could barely afford, was $20 a day, which is phenomenally cheap now in today's standards. If you go to a hospital now, or as I've come to find out, they cost $1,000 or thousands of dollars just for a test. My mother was there for a year.
The name of the place.
Kessler Institute in West Orange, New Jersey. Well, obviously my dad and I had to visit my mother. So that would leave one of us at the store. And we would take the bus and go to New York City and take a bus from New York City to West Orange and walk to the hospital, and the way back leaving the other alone at the store. But we coped and we didn't think anything about it. Well, my mother ultimately went through the rehabilitation and came home. Home for us was not a very nice place to live. It was on the second floor of a ramshackle house. I don't know how to describe it. There was no heating. There was gas stoves that were probably a danger to explode and blow up. It's a wonder that we all survived. But it was a loving home, and we didn't think anything about it. I don't know how it magically happened, but we had a fairly good-sized bathroom, and we were able to put up parallel bars there where my mother did her exercises. Again, she was completely paralyzed. And my mother was a phenomenal woman. She, even paralyzed in a wheelchair, she did all the cooking. She did all the washing by putting the things in the bathtub and using a wood stick to wash them. Someone donated a hospital bed, and she had to do exercises each day. So again, my father and I were at the store. So one of us, pretty much me, I guess, had to come up, and she couldn't walk, get her out of her chair, help her with her exercises, and she'd stomp around the room with braces and crutches. She was phenomenal. Again, my buddies, this was the time of the Korean War, and I was deferred because of going to college, and I was deferred that my mother was quasi-dependent on me. But I think they both realized that if I continued with the restaurant, that would be my life. And frankly, I got tired of being the welcoming committee for my friends, partying all the time from the service and then seeing them off. So I more or less decided that, I was going to lose my deferment and go in the Army. Well, this caused a series of things that my father couldn't obviously take care of the store, and my mother at the same time. So we arranged for my mother to go back to her village in Yatta and live with one of her loving sisters. Kirana Branditsas with her husband John, and there she went. And I really don't know how, and perhaps didn't think that much about it, how my father did with the store. He ultimately sold it, but nevertheless, I was drafted in the Army and took basic training in Fort Dix, New Jersey. Well, in the Army applications, they asked you what your aptitude was. Well, certainly mine was typing. And what skills I had, no, certainly typing. What languages I knew, typing. So, strangely, I wound up in typing school in Fort Dix, New Jersey after basic training. And there, one of the ironies of life occurred that I think at the halfway mark, which probably was around Christmas time, coincidentally, I got drafted in the Army of September 1956, excuse me. Well, one of the ironies occurred that half of our class was just wiped out. They were sent to computer school. Unfortunately, it was alphabetically in my name with S. Didn't go. So how would my life have changed had I learned computers back in the 50s when they were near non-existent? I'll never know. Well, life went on in clerk typist school, and it was good news and bad news that I had some college and was a fairly bright student, but unfortunately most of the kids in my class were law school graduates, so although I think I held my own, again, this clerk typist school was the only one in the country that let you select where you wanted to go based on what was available by rank in the class. And all I could remember was, there was one spot left for San Francisco, which I thought would be really nice. And there was one guy ahead of me. And then he said the magic words of, what's this, in Watertown, Fort.
Oh. Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
Whatever.
Fort Drum? No.
Fort
Yeah.
Drum. Fort Drum. He said Fort Drum, New York. So I obviously picked San Francisco, California. Well, I met him years later. He took Fort Drum because he had a girlfriend near there, and they split up right away, so I guess you never know. So I was set to go to San Francisco. And San Francisco is a beautiful spot. It was the Presidio, which is located right on the bay, right across from Alcatraz, probably some of the most valuable property in the United States. And San Francisco was the 6th Army headquarters. Well, I got sent as a typist to the 6th Army headquarters of the Inspector General. And what that means is the United States was broken into 6 areas, and the Inspector General is in charge of all investigating and complaints that are filtered. Obviously, me as an enlisted man didn't do that, but I typed many of these things, so it was really a good job. And I really liked San Francisco. But another minor incident happened before the major one, that you could send half your pay, which was $75 a month, as I recall, to your dependent, and the government would match it. Well, I was always one for free money, so I signed up, But unfortunately, when they went to check my father, if my mother was dependent on me, he said, no, I take care of my mother. So they sent nothing. So meanwhile, I'm in San Francisco, California, living on $35 a month. Well, that's the way it goes. Well, I mentioned it to the Inspector General that, hey, they turned down my dependency. Well, we'll see about that. So they went back again. And again, my father, no, he doesn't do it. So the check, the $40 check went to Nyata every month, which was fine. I'm glad that my mother had it, but I kind of could have used the money in San Francisco. But I really enjoyed it, and part of the enjoyment was that you make a band with your fellow soldiers. You really do. And this was not even in wartime, so I hate to think. There's a significance between being drafted and enlisting. Your serial number says U.S. if you're drafted, and if you're enlisted, like my brother-in-law John, it's R.A., which means regular Army. Well, RA is this and US is this. US doesn't like the Army, never will. And to show our contempt, we had to sweep the floor in our barracks, all of us US. And after the sergeant left, we put the dirt back where it was. So, unfortunately, we used to have reveille and retreat every night. Reveille, you'd go out in the courtyard and salute the flag, and retreat being they bring the flag down and you're out in the courtyard, everybody. Well, this is not something I was interested in, so I didn't go. Well, unfortunately, my sergeant caught me, and that reduced my career. I never was promoted in San Francisco. But my band of brothers, and I was confined to barracks for a week. My band of brothers wouldn't tolerate this. They stayed in the barracks for a week too. So and my band of brothers, I was a good pinochle player, and they wanted to learn, and they wanted to play for money just like I played. Well, pretty easy to say it. If I'm teaching them and we're paying for money, I'm going to win most of the time. But they're a great bunch of guys. But what happened next, and I don't know if you want to cut this off soon.
You want to take a break?
We can keep going if you want.
Sure. You want a drink of water or anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
No, I'm going to keep going.
Okay. Oh, I'm just going to stop you at 45 minutes, just to flip the tape.
All right.
So,
How close are we?
I'll give you a 1 minute sign. And we're
You want me
close.
to keep going?
Yeah, we got 6, 7 minutes.
All right. There were 3 or 4 of us that went to the Presidio from Fort Dix, and we were in different places. I could think of one guy was a typist for the MPs, and more importantly, one guy was a typist for personnel. And I let it be known that my mother was in Greece, and I would sure like to go to Greece. Well, the guy in personnel told me, hey, something is coming down for Turkey. And I immediately signed up and volunteered for Turkey. Well, I guess the good Lord was looking favorable upon me. Turkey, most of it was soldiers living in tents on the Russian border, and this is when things were like that with the Russians, afraid they would attack. So that's where most of the people were. So unbeknownst to me, I could have wound up living in a tent on the Russian border. But no, Providence looked down upon me. But there was another incident that occurred before I went to Turkey. One of the officers I worked for was being stationed in Greece. And he knew me, and he knew I wanted to go to Greece. And he said, you know, I'll take you away. He was a colonel. I'll take you with me, but you have to sign up for another year in the Army. And maybe that was the wrong thing to do. I'll never know. But I couldn't imagine signing up for another year in the Army, so I did not go to Greece. Well, so off to Turkey, and where I went was Izmir, which was a Turkish combination of what used to be called Smyrna. The Greeks used to say, is Smyrna, and somehow the Turkish people called the city Izmir. And this was the second largest city in Turkey. And this was home for the Southeastern Europe NATO, which was pretty much Greece and Turkey. So there were Greek soldiers there, there were Turkish soldiers there, and myself. Well, the thing I didn't know, but soon found out, the attraction for all of Turkey was the most blatant black market in the world. The way it turned out, again by sheer luck, the Army would house us outside the city. We had to take a bus into work every day back and forth, but didn't feed us. Instead, they gave us money. Well, the Turkish lira was 2.8 lira per dollar if you went to the bank. But if you got it in the black market, it was 18 lira. So that's, I don't know the math, 5 times as much. So basically they were giving you enough money to eat comfortably and all this extra money. And to compound it, there were Greek soldiers there, and they got paid in lira, which was worthless in Greece if they went back. So they had to sell it to us to get dollars. So we had a ready-made market. Well, all this money, I had a great time with the money. We had at the PX tailors from London, and I had tailor-made suits, tailor-made sport coats, which I still have. Took numerous trips to Greece, which I'll talk about a little more. Lived quite well as far as eating. And another piece of luck is I became good friends with another soldier named Stathis. Well, by the name, you know he's Greek. And what his background was, he was born in the United States, but somehow his family moved back to Greece, and he was raised in Greece. So I don't know if he knew much English, but he was an American soldier. Well, through him, I met 3 Greek secretaries, females, that lived together, and they were just as nice as could be. And Vandalis and a couple other GIs like me would spend a lot of time in their apartments, in our apartment. And frankly, we didn't treat them as well as we probably should have. The downside of this was we were not too much liked by the Greek army, particularly the officers, because these Greek girls were pretty much ignoring them and dealing with enlisted men from the United States Army. So, and to compound it, for me, is occasionally I would do some favors for Greek generals there from doing something in the PX. And in turn, I would get free airline rides on the Greek general's plane. Again, the officers look at me entering the plane, were not too enthused, to say the least. So, but nevertheless, what happened there was a pleasant year, but let me start with what happened. Say when, honey.
Okay, let me, I think we're about to end that side of the tape.
Okay. Stop.
Yeah.
And turn the side of the tape.
Okay. Okay.
How is this so far, honey?
Look good, Tom. How are you doing?
Okay.
Let me just look at this. How's your voice? Oh, this is, we've got a lot more time. I thought this was a 90-minute tape.
Okay.
We can stop and start whenever.
Well, it's just some more interesting things, and then life got happy as a parent, husband and a parent, so I won't have much to say about that except that it's a good life. So far, so good.
Yeah, it's great.
Did you want to interject anything there?
Oh. Not yet.
Okay.
Maybe we'll have a few opportunities.
Here,
Oh, wait.
take this or put it down at the
Sure.
table.
Well, there's a coaster here if you want.
I don't want to screw up things here. Where was I? Okay.
All right. Let me just.
Well, you'll have to play this at home or something to see how it is. And is this what you expected, honey?
Yeah, I think so. So you seem pretty comfortable up talking. Margaret started dinner.
Okay, this won't be too much longer, honey.
Okay. You want to just continue, or do you want to
Oh,
wait?
no, I'll wait for longer.
Yeah.
Well, no, we should wait.
Yeah. Okay.
Or ask her.
Okay. Monger's gonna cook. Monger's gonna cook. Do you want to wait?
What does she want?
She said we can continue unless you want to wait.
All right. Well, she can watch this sometime, can't she?
Of course.
All right, let's continue.
Okay.
Tell me when I can continue.
Yep. 1 minute here. Okay, Tom.
Well, all right, so I gave a little bit of a background on Izmir, but I should explain what happened. So now I'm in Izmir, and as far as my mother knows, I'm in San Francisco, and I used to type letters to her. So as soon as I was able, I was going to go to surprise my mother in Yatta. And I think within the next month I did, and perhaps it was even weeks, that I did, and that was really something that, first I didn't know what is Nyata. Well, turned out I didn't know this. Nyata means youth in Greek. And so I made bus arrangements once I flew to Athens. Was it on?
No.
Should I start over?
Well, we got it on video.
Made bus arrangements and got half scared to death as on some of those mountain roads. I was on the back of the bus and all I could see is this 2-lane highway and looking down at the rocks. But nevertheless, I got there. And to say my mother was surprised is the understatement of the year. It was quite a joyous occasion. Her sister and her husband, again, Kirana and John Branditsis, were a loving couple, and they had a son called Dimitraki. He was probably 6 or 7 then. So I did get a chance to meet my mother, and to say it was miraculous is an understatement. And as a result, I got to meet some of my cousins, and when I went back to Athens, they went back with me and offered their household for me anytime I wanted to come over. And their names were Michael Koliakos, Eleni, and I forgot she was married, and I can't think of her married name offhand, with a husband named Costa and a child named Rula. And the third one was Margarita. So even though Costa and Eleni had the house, all the siblings lived together and offered their household to me, and they were truly loving cousins. They were my mother's sister's children. So in the future, I made I think at least 2 more trips to Nyata, and even more frequent trips to Athens, because I did those on a weekend pass, and I didn't have enough time to go from Athens to Nyata and back on a weekend. So I got to meet them, and it was truly a tremendous experience. Well, now it was decision time again. My 2-year tour in the Army was going to be up in September, and what am I going to do now? Well, I thought, I better finish college. I better have some alternatives. And I'm going to get out early if I can to go to summer school, because frankly I was afraid that it was a 5-year stint from a junior year to a senior year. And basically one of the courses, which was supposedly one of the most difficult, I took Business Statistics 1, and now I have to take Business Statistics 2 when I got back. So I arranged to get out 3 months early, which I did. And again, I had a great time in Izmir. It was highlighted by a trip for a religious retreat, which I was able to combine visiting many cities in France, Germany, Switzerland, Turkey, Greece. I think I covered them all. And really had a grand tour. It was with my friend, again, Pantelis Stathis, who coincidentally 50 years later contacted me and sent some tapes of that tour, which was really very nice. And I know my wife and daughter enjoyed looking at it as I did. And the other highlight was Mats drove people back from the service back to the States, Mats being military air transport systems. But unfortunately, there were some other uprisings, so Mats was not available, so they gave us commercial airline tickets to come back, and a week to do it, and anyway wanted to do it. So I took opportunity of this and went to Copenhagen, Germany, England, and ate and drank very nicely on the plane, which was first class. Excuse me. So now I was back in the United States. Meanwhile, my mother had come back, or was coming back. I don't recall. So I went to State College in the summertime and really settled down. But here I was thinking, I was wound up in living in the attic of a place that was for rent, and not really having much of a good time. And I could have been on the beaches in Izmir with the Greek secretaries and my friends and having a good time, eating calamari in the restaurants and whatever. But I didn't save any money when I was in the Army, obviously. I spent it on travel and other things, and I have no regrets about doing that. In fact, I still have the sports coats. I don't know if my daughter appreciates me wearing, but they still fit till I lost some weight recently. But I also had some pride in, we're not going to make my parents paid for this, so I was trying to get by on eating on $1 a day. And although things were cheaper then, believe me, $1 a day did not go very far. But I buckled down. I got an A in business statistics too. I took in the summertime. And I really buckled down and got an A in every course I took that semester except one. And the reason I didn't get an A there was because I cut a Saturday class and I got a B. So I would have gotten straight A's. But then again, I started coasting, and I wound up living with 3 guys that were bartenders each in their spare time, and I really had a lot of fun. One was on the Olympic team too. He was a wrestler, so it was an interesting experience. Before I moved in with them, you never know about ironies. I went in, I shared a room with a Greek kid, Greek American, who spent more time trying to connive stealing tests and studying. And he used to confide in me that his dad used to run around on his mother, etc. The reason I'm mentioning this is because before I forget it, on a later trip to Greece, I met his wife, mother and father. So, like, you never know how things are going to work out. So now it's graduation time, and unfortunately, the economy was not very good then, and jobs were few and far between. Not as severe as it is now, but severe enough that you were not sure of a job. So I interviewed for some jobs and got accepted in the Ford Motor Company in the tractor division in Detroit. Well, meanwhile, in one of my accounting classes, I heard a student say he got accepted in a job in Rochester, New York, and he was going to turn it down. And then I casually mentioned to him, well, if you're going to write him a letter, I'll write him that I'd like to apply for it. And we did, and I did get an opportunity to interview for the job, and I got it, and I passed. And the reason I took the job was it paid $5 a month more than the Detroit job, specifically $475 a month as opposed to $470 a month in Detroit. I think if you compare that with today's wages, if I'm doing my math right, that's less than $6,000 a year. So I started working for the Delco Appliance Division of General Motors. And again, I had no car. And again, I was a master of hitchhiking, and things went well. And I progressed there, but unfortunately, as far as career enhancement, that was definitely not the place to work. Because I don't know if you ever saw the movie The Apartment with Jack Lemmon, where they had a giant room of people sitting at desks doing exactly the same thing with the Frieden calculator bouncing back and forth. That's the way it was there. I did learn a lot, I'll say that, and I was able to progress nicely. One interesting note, I was put in charge of inventories, taking inventories. One plant, the main plant was on Lyle Avenue, but there was another plant also on Lyle Avenue, way up the street. And General Motors gave me a car to go to the other plant. Well, that was great, but I didn't know how to drive. So I had to kind of connive to get around that, and I did. Was fortunate enough that I got many rides to work and walked and walked and walked. before I finally did break down and get a car. Meanwhile, before I got the car, I was still hitchhiking back and forth to Wellsboro and seeing my friends and everything. And again, that ended with a blaze of glory too. It's one thing to hitchhike when you're 18 years old and look young, but another thing to be when you're quite a bit older and not looking so young that people didn't pick you up. So I got stuck in Springwater, New York, and got so desperate I hitchhiked on both sides of the road, not caring which way I went, just to get out of there. And someone picked me up going to Rochester. And that worked out pretty well because they went to party in Rochester. It was a husband and a wife and their 2 kids. And I joined them. So, as I say, I went out in a blaze of glory on my final hitchhiking days. I think the tape is stopping now.
Okay. End of part 1.
Okay.
Shall we say hello to the camera?
Oh,
You want to say hello?
Oh, say hello to the camera?
Yeah.
Oh, is it running?
Yeah. Oh, hi.
Hi.
the jewels of my life. They're not Turkish.
Oh, and what did Papu call your time in...
Oh, yeah, okay, we'll say that.
Still running.
Oh, okay, Katie reminded me what my father used to call my time in Izmir. My father was a World War I veteran, very, very proud of it, as he should be. He got gassed over there, unfortunately. He didn't speak of his battle experiences, but he used to call my experience the Battle of the Kalamadia. And that's truly what it was, because I used to enjoy eating it all the time.
We'll end on the Kalamadia. Very good, Tone. Okay.
Well, this is the next day, so my beard is longer, and being me, my clothes are the same, so... But life went on pretty much the same, working for General Motors. Most of the time I had roommates and shared either a house or apartments with. A couple of interesting things that we had half a house at one time, and 3 of us had it, and to save money, one offered to sleep in the closet so we can take a 4th person in. And the same person, we had another guy with us who was an engineer at General Motors, and he had a habit of clearing his throat all the time. So my friend Al was the other guy. We would always go all the time. So, and well, speaking of Al, he was a pilot in the reserves, and he was a heavy smoker like me, and we worked in the same big room together, and all you see him is hunched over and a big cloud of smoke over his head. And one final thing, it was finally Al and a guy named Howard Cable and I shared an apartment. All 3 of us worked in the same big room. All 3 of us drove separately to work. And I had a habit of oversleeping, and you had to sign in when you came in late, and quite often I'd say, I'm not going to do that, I'll just go back home and call in sick. But once they asked, where's Tony, Al? Or Howard, where's Tony? And they didn't know, even though we all lived in the same room. So, but nevertheless, life went on at General Motors, and then something changed that the Delco Appliance division that I worked in was going to consolidate with one in Dayton, Ohio. And what happened to all the people there was that they'd either get an opportunity to go to Dayton or they wouldn't have a job. Quite that simple. In fact, one of my best friends, even now, is Bill Kalamanka. We work together. I had an offer to go to Dayton. Bill did not, unfortunately. He signed up with Kodak, so it worked out well for him. So I was going to go to Dayton and share a room with another friend of mine called Nick Brancatisano, who later shortened it to Nick Branca. And coincidentally, small world, that the priest in the Orthodox Church was Father Jerry Tacikas, who became the priest here in Rochester. But I had second thoughts about it, that it would be a little bit longer distance to get back to Wellsboro to see my parents. And so I decided, no, I'm not going to go to Dayton. And I had another friend that worked at Xerox, and fortunately he was able to get me a job at Xerox. And not being too bright, when they asked what salary I wanted, I just wanted the same salary that I got at General Motors, and I'm sure I could have asked for more and gotten it. So now I'm a Xerox employee, but it was quite a tumultuous start, to say the least. That I believe my last day was, I think the last day in January, and my first day at Xerox was the first day in February 1966. Well, there was a tremendous snowstorm, and people couldn't even get out of their apartments, so I didn't even go to my last day at General Motors to say goodbye to my friends. And I missed my first day at Xerox because I couldn't get out in the snow. But nevertheless, I started at Xerox. And at that time, they had offices in Rochester, so I worked in what was in the Sibley Tower building. And one of the girls I met, and she never said anything to me, was my Aunt Florence's niece on her side of the family, Vicki Howard. But she never mentioned that Aunt Florence was her aunt, and excuse me, I stand corrected, Woodward? Vicki Woodward. And she was my aunt, but that's just a small tidbit. Well, ultimately, we moved to the complex in Webster, New York. And life with Xerox was completely different than life with General Motors. Xerox was a fast-growing company. They couldn't hire people fast enough. No one knew the procedures or the protocols of Xerox. Everybody did their own thing. And at General Motors, we never made presentations or anything like that. We just stayed in the big giant office and hit the calculators all the time. But here in my first week in Xerox, I was probably asked to make a presentation. So it was a completely different world. And I'm afraid my General Motors background did not help me at Xerox. But nevertheless, I went along and got my promotions and did okay. I certainly had the mentality to do better, but not the playing the politics and presenting things. I lacked those, and those are skills you should have. But another important thing happened while going to Xerox is at General Motors they had what they called a stock savings plan. And I think you could put 5% of your salary in this plan. Half of it would go to bonds and half of it would go to stocks, and they'd match the half that went to bonds. So this was like free money. And General Motors was then a big deal. It was one of the best corporations in the country, and the stock kept rising. Well, Xerox had nothing like that. So I thought, well, investing in stocks seems pretty good, so I'm going to have to do that on my own. So that was one really good thing that happened, so I started on my own. And back in those days, they had things like a monthly investment plan where you could invest as little as $25 at a time and watch it grow. And grow it did. My selection of stocks was not very good. As I recall, the first three I bought was AT&T, Eastman Kodak, and General Motors. And those of you who are familiar with that is Eastman Kodak went bankrupt and so did General Motors. But I learned a lesson that if you're going to provide for the future, putting it in the bank or in bonds gives you no opportunity for growth. So if you want to take a chance and hope that your money grows, you're kind of forced to get into stocks. And over the years, I learned a few lessons that it helps to diversify, it helps to asset allocation, and no one is smart enough to time the market, so just invest on a steady basis. I don't profess to say I did outstanding. In fact, I probably underperformed the market. In those days, the Dow Jones was around $200. Now it's $15,000. So you can see the opportunity to growth. If there's any advice I want to give to my heirs is you should think seriously of investing for the long term. But I'm digressing. So the next thing that was a very significant thing in my life is my uncle in Fairport passed away. And being the only relative on his side of the family, I was with Aunt Florence for the wake. And my uncle was a very popular person. His candy kitchen was a landmark in Webster, or excuse me, Fairport. So many, many people came. Included in the many, many people were a couple called Mr. and Mrs. Carvelis. Mr. Carvelis worked for my uncle, and for them to be there was somewhat miraculous because he did not like to travel, but to pay his respects to my uncle, they made the trip up. And apparently I made an impression on him. As my wife-to-be said in the future, they liked my sense of humor. My sense of humor at a wake didn't really seem appropriate. But what happened was that their daughter, Aphrodite, I call her Dee Dee, was single, nice Greek girl, and they arranged to, with a common relative, Nick Busalis from Williamson, to want to bring him down to meet their daughter. Nothing wrong with that, so it was a good idea. The trip was something I remember because I was out the night before quite late. Probably was a Friday night, and we went on a Saturday, as I recall. Well, we stopped for lunch in a small town. Then when we got to Norwich, where they lived, we went to the restaurant and we ate again. And then we went to the house, and there was a giant dinner waiting for us. So, and the other thing was that we brought our overnight clothes with the intention of staying overnight. And again, the Carvelises asked us to stay, and my uncle Nick said, "Oh no, we're going back." So, so being exhausted from the night before, 3 full meals and a lot of pleasant company, and seeing this beautiful girl across the room, back we drove to Webster, where I lived in Rochester. So, but nevertheless, I was really impressed, and this was another milestone in my life, perhaps the most important, that I contacted this lovely young girl who was a teacher in Baldwinsville, New York, and lived in Syracuse. and we arranged to meet in Syracuse and go out. And when I did meet her, this was during Easter break when she was out of school for the Easter vacation. And we had a long courtship. I mean, it was Easter in April and we got married in September. But that was probably the best thing I ever did in my life. Life went on, had blessings and tragedies. Had two lovely children, Nicholas and Catherine, and I lost both my mother and father. Naturally, I remember how the children were born, but I also remember how my parents died. I happened to be in Wellsboro when my mother died, and she died in her sleep. And, you know, I went in to try to wake her, and why didn't she wake up? Well, because she was dead. And this is when my wife was pregnant with Katie. So I had to contact my wife and tell her the bad news. And fortunately, that neither one of us had given it any thought. My Aunt Florence, unbeknownst to us, had bought plots in the cemetery up here. So that's how my mother died. How my father died was, he was in his, well, probably 80s, I guess. I'm not even really sure. And ironically, when I was a youngster, I used to hang out in the pool room all the time. I used to be a fairly good pool player. And he was always after me not to be there, and sometimes he even went there and dragged me out of there. Well, ironically, he became best friends with the guy that owned the pool hall, and who was reputed to be, what do they call it during Prohibition? Help me out.
Smuggler, whiskey runner,
Yeah.
speakeasy, bootlegger.
He was known to be a bootlegger in his days, and they became friends. And so it's a small world. What goes around comes around, and they were both the same age and can reminisce about the good old days. But the way I heard about my father, I think he was suffering somewhat from dementia and was taken sick and was in the hospital. And I came back from bowling, which I used to do once a week, and having beer frames and everything else, and the phone rang. And it was a friend of mine from Wellsboro, Bill Coolidge, who was Dr. Bill Coolidge then, and he told me my father passed away. So that was pretty sad. And obviously many years later, Dee Dee's dad passed away too, which was a tragic thing too. But life went on pretty much as a family should. My friend Bill in Kalamanka had me go to a clam bake at his church, and I had a good time, a lot of beers and all the clams you can eat. But what I didn't realize that Dee Dee and his wife were getting together, and she told her about this house on Judson Street we ought to buy. You know, I never lived a house in all my life. And, well, the next thing I know is, well, we're going to buy a house, because it seemed reasonable too. So that was another milestone for us to buy a house. And the good news and the bad news was the guy selling it was the head of one of the heads of procurement. That's buying and selling, and that's what he did for a living. Meanwhile, I know nothing about houses. So I'm sure he overcharged me, and I didn't know the difference, but it was well worth it. So we lived happily and continue to live happily on Judson Street. Our children have grown up. Dee Dee and I took a trip when only Nikki was around to Greece and had a wonderful time. Later, we took another trip with Katie and Nikki and met the relatives and had another wonderful time. So my life was pretty happy from meeting my lovely wife, and that's where I am now. So in conclusion, what I have to say is I'm 80 years old. I lived a full and happy life. I have no regrets, and I consider myself very, very lucky. And I wish all the people that see this tape the best of health and the best of everything. You'll always be in my prayers. Thank you very much. That's it. Okay. One thing I neglected to add, and it's quite important thing in my wife's life and mine, was Nikki marrying Anna, a happy event, and they blessed us with 2 lovely grandchildren, which is another thing I'm very, very thankful for, in addition to all the other blessings I've had. Good night.
What was that?
That's a song that this Greek American in the Air Force taught me in Izmir, and he's the guy whose parents came over to visit in Greece, and he supposedly fell off the back of a truck and died.
Yeah.
But my friend Pat Lockey told me there was suspicions of murder that I never knew about till he told me 50 years later, and
Wow.
obviously his parents
Wow.
might have to do with the black market over there, so,
Wow.
you know, it was kind of strange to fall off a truck and die. But he taught me that, so
How does it go?
that's about all I remember. Omorphia Athena, you know what that means. Beautiful Athens. Banda Chronyakina, gone are the days of old. Omorphia Athena, Banda Chronyakina, Da Chronya Takala, the years that were good. And that's about all I remember.
All right.
Well, that's it.
Okay.
Testing 1, 2, 3.
Oh, hi.
Hi.
How are you?
Fine, thank you.
Good.
Okay?
Yeah, let's see how that works.